Hi, I'm Aldo. Welcome to Plays the Thing, a channel where I share my experiences prepping and playing tabletop role-playing games, and this is the 5th play report for our Shadowdark Freeport Adventures campaign. Before I delve into what happened in this session, let me reflect a little bit on what my state of mind has been with regards to gaming recently. I feel like I've been torn in multiple directions, and I always kind of suffer a little bit from what I'll call role-playing ADD, and I say that without meaning to trivialize attention deficit disorder, but I really do wonder sometimes about the way that I'm wired and my hopping from one system to another, to another, to another. And that might not be apparent from the play reports I share on this channel because I've narrowed this content down to a few very specific games that I run, but the truth is that in between those established campaigns, I'm constantly hopping from system to system, and sometimes they become a cacophony of systems in my head that I'm interested in exploring, and it makes it difficult for me to sit down and actually prep for one thing. Recently, for example, I've been jumping between 3 different versions of Rolemaster: Rolemaster Classic, Rolemaster Standard System, and the new Rolemaster Unified, trying to figure out which one might be most interesting for me to pursue. I'm also looking at HARP Fantasy, which is a kind of a lower complexity take on Rolemaster, and I've been juggling all of those thinking that maybe I might try to run one of these weekends. Simultaneously, I'm telling myself, okay, I need to prep Shadowdark Freeport, and I'd like to run a PBTA game for my friend Jason, maybe Dungeon World or Dungeon Planet. I'm also thinking that I'd like to get my playtest of Heroes Unbound going with my regular group. And on top of that, I'm prepping for school, both my high school job and my university job. And I've been traveling over the holidays, so it's been kind of a mess up here. So my mind has been overwhelmed by all these different things, all these different directions. And the reason I mention that now is because, one, it's a real struggle, and one that sometimes leaves me wondering how effective I can actually be as a game master. And two, because on this particular day, when we got together to play, I honestly wasn't sure that I was ready. In fact, when I sat down to play, I was thinking that maybe everybody would want to play something else, and that maybe my friend Jason, who's been running Space Master recently, would do so. And I started to get pretty comfortable with the idea that I probably wouldn't be up that night. But the moment we sat down, it became obvious that Jason really wasn't in the mood to game master. And so I said, okay, look, the only things that I could actually do are Shadowdark Freeport and maybe Dungeon Planet. But based on the size of the group that we had that day and the fact that nobody had characters for Dungeon Planet, I said, I'm going to take that off the table. And I said, actually, if we're going to play and if I'm going to GM, it's going to have to be Shadowdark Freeport. And so then everybody was like, okay, cool, let's log into that game. And then I was like, okay, I guess let's log into that game. And I started to get really nervous, uncharacteristically nervous. I felt more nervous than I have in a long time GMing because I hadn't cracked the adventure open in weeks, and I just wasn't in the right frame of mind. But if you followed my reports on this campaign, you know that I had created these faction lists and these time clocks, and I had taken what was a pretty linear adventure and turned it into something that was far more situation based, and that became my saving grace. So this is what happened. Although I was unprepared to run that night, I could open up those old documents and start to recap the situation for my players. And really, I had to do that anyway because several players hadn't been in some of the more recent sessions. Dano, who plays Tordelkin the Ranger, was joining us this time, and he hadn't been in several sessions. And Mike had missed the session right after the player characters had murdered Counselor Verlaine. So I had to give a detailed recap, and I chose to kind of give a recap of the entire campaign. And by going through that recap, I was basically prepping right there, reminding myself of all the variables and everything that was in place. And by the time I was done with the recap, everybody, including myself, was reintroduced to the fact that the characters had murdered the corrupt Counselor Verlaine, that they'd been hiding out ever since, that their location had been discovered by assassins, and that they were en route to relocating to a new hideout. At that point, I was like, okay, I think I've got this. Then I turned to my players and started getting them invested in building out the situation. I turned to Dan, for example, and I said, Dan, your character, Scalawag Sue, is the one who found the new hideout, right? So why don't you tell me what it is? Dan said, you know what? It's going to be an old, dilapidated boathouse on the docks. That was great. I wouldn't have thought of that as a location. So I'm glad that Dan gave it to me. Then I turned to Mike, who hadn't played in the previous session. And I asked Mike what Nicodeme, his thief, had been doing while away from the party ever since the murder of Councillor Verlaine. And he told me that Nicodeme had split off from the party to go into the underworld and start spreading misinformation about their movements and about Cora. Red Cora, remember, had been made at the scene of the murder. And so he wanted to kind of like throw people off her trail. I had him made a charisma roll and he rolled a 15. So that meant that any faction rolls that were made to find the party would be at a higher difficulty for that faction because of Nicodeme's efforts. I then turned to Dano, who had not been in some of the big momentous events of the last few sessions. And I asked him what Tordelkin had been up to. And Dano, who had listened attentively to the recap, said that he was probably going to have a conversation with Fabriio, the darling of the docks, and he imagined that Fabriio would have kind of filled him in and maybe helped him connect to where it was that the players were hiding out now that they'd shifted their locations. I huddled with both Mike and Dano, and they agreed that Nicodeme and Tordelkin would have met probably at the tavern where Fabriio was. They would have filled each other in, and they would have both realized where the party was hiding out, and so they were going to go and meet their friends over there that night. So then I turned to the party that was hanging out at the boathouse, and I asked them what their watch order would be. Lauren, who plays Red Cora, said that Cora was drunk and sleeping in a dinghy, so she wasn't going to be of any use during the watches. Jason told me that Voron was going to take first watch, and the other characters said they'd take second, third, and fourth watch, but they were all sleeping in this first watch of the day. Egil and Lucius, the two NPCs that are attached to the Temple of Ord, but kind of on the run as well, were with them as well. And the party didn't trust them. Voron in particular didn't trust them enough to watch, so they weren't going to help in that endeavor. And by the way, Voron was very clear that he was going to be peeking out through the slats of wood on the boathouse, like towards the city proper. So then I turned back to Tordelkin and Nicodeme and said, hey, how are you guys approaching the boathouse? And they said, all right, we don't want to approach it from the most direct way. So we want to kind of come around and come in from the back, which means that they would not be spotted by Voron. I said, that's totally fine. I mean, they weren't trying to avoid Voron. It just turned out that that was the direction they chose, which just meant that Voron wasn't going to see them. I then rolled a d4 to see during what watch they would arrive. And I rolled a 1. And this was really important because everybody knew that there was an assassin that had followed them from their previous hideout to the new hideout. And I knew that that assassin was going to make a move during the first watch. So when I rolled a 1 to see when Nicodeme and Tordelkin would arrive, that meant that they would be arriving at the very moment that the assassin would be starting to make his move. With that in mind, I had Nicodeme and Tordelkin make stealth rolls and make wisdom rolls. They failed at them, at least relative to the assassin. So I knew that the assassin had seen them, but that they had not seen the assassin. I said, all right. I told them, you guys both arrive behind this boathouse. You're in the shadows. You're together. What is your next move? And they said, all right, we're not going to move on the boathouse together. Tordelkin will move up next to the boathouse. And after that, once Tordelkin was secure, Nicodeme would do the same and join him. That became crucial because it meant that Tordelkin was going to leave Nicodeme alone in the shadows. That meant that Nicodeme was going to be a perfect target for an assassination. So I had Nicodeme make one more wisdom check. He did not roll well enough to notice the assassin coming up behind him. And then I said, Mike, you're alone in the shadows. Nicodeme failed his roll, and now an assassin is coming up behind him with a garrote. And he's going to have advantage to hit you, and he's going to get his special abilities to kick in, which could be really bad news for Nicodeme. And me just being very upfront about what was about to happen meant that everybody was like on the edge of their seats, like, oh my gosh, like this could be it. And so I'm rolling on these. This is a VTT, so everybody can see my rolls. I made one roll first and the assassin missed. So I said, okay, well, he gets advantage, so we get a second roll. I rolled the second roll, natural 1. Everybody explodes, including myself. I jumped back applauding because it was just such a, I said, Mike, tell me what happens. How does this assassin fail? And Mike just said, you know what? He notices the Garrote coming over him at the very last minute, and Nicodeme's just so fast that he drops down to his haunches, whips out a knife. And what happened then was, for a round or two, this vicious knife fight as they were kind of circling each other and stabbing at each other in the shadows. It was kind of like, West Side Story style, right? Going at it. And then eventually, after a round or two of that, they spun out of the shadows, and Tordelkin at that point noticed what was going on. So then Tordelkin fired an arrow at the assassin and missed, but the twang of the arrow of the bow alerted Voron. Voron heard it with his elven hearing, woke up Zara Zambura, who was one of the heavier, not drunk combatants in the team, and the two of them went out to join the situation. The assassin took an arrow to the bicep and saw all these people pouring out of the boathouse, knew that they were done, so they fled the scene and rounded a corner. The party all ran up, Tordelkin kind of in the lead actually, to see if he can catch up to the assassin. But when he saw that the assassin was nowhere to be seen and it was just dark alleys and stuff, everybody decided that it would not be a good idea to follow an assassin into their element. And so everybody went back to the boathouse. And at that point, we skipped to morning. I said the rest of the evening goes without incident. Let's skip to the morning and see what you guys want to do. One of the things that came up right away when everybody became involved in the conversation was the possibility of leaving Freeport altogether. Everybody was like, I've had enough of this place. I don't want to deal with authorities. Let's just get the hell out of here. And there was a lot of support for this idea, but Soralia, our priestess to Ord, said, I'm not comfortable leaving Brother Egil and Lucius to whatever fate is going to await them here. Like, I'm not comfortable with that. And Voron at that point, well, will Egil and Lucius join us? Egil and Lucius look at each other, but the question is kind of left hanging. At this point, everybody started to kind of like chime in and stuff, and the conversation started to get jumbled. We started to lose track of what was happening. So I said, all right, everybody, let's go down. Let's go back to Shadowdark protocols, and we rolled initiative. And then based on the initiative order, I went around and I asked, all right, what are you going to do for the day? Whatever that is, what are you going to do for the day? So these are the answers that I got. Voron said that he wanted to try to get someone to take him to the lighthouse that was being constructed on an island just off the shore of Freeport. And that lighthouse is called Milton's Folly. And the reason he wanted to go there is because the paperwork that they had stolen from Verlaine's home had revealed that the Sea Lord has some mysterious thing that he's doing, and that thing is centered on the lighthouse. So he wanted to go and see what was going on at the lighthouse and on that island. Tordelkin said that he was going to join Voron in that endeavor. So I then turned to Cora. Cora said that she would try to repair the dinghy that was in the boathouse in case they needed a boat. And unfortunately, Lauren had bad rolls all night, so when she rolled for Cora to do that, she failed and basically made the boat worse than it was before. We laughed that you would lower the dinghy into the water and it would just keep going all the way down to the bottom of the sea. So that was too bad for Lauren. Again, it was indicative of the luck she was going to have this night, but that's what she spent her time doing. And Soralia said that she would keep Cora company because she was unsure about. Cora has the propensity to wander off, and Soralia wanted to make sure that she didn't. In the meantime, I said that Egil and Lucius would be in that area and that they were going to be writing all day long, that they would be off in the corner somewhere working on something that they were jotting down. But nobody asked what that was, so we left it at that. Adolfo told me that Zara would go out to buy some arrows, and he also said that Zara would maybe try to get hired as a sellsword to see if she could infiltrate some of the mercenary companies like the Yellow Shields that they'd been dealing with recently. But she didn't have too much to go on in terms of the underworld in this city. So I wasn't sure how that was going to work out, and he wasn't sure how that was going to work out, but he was going to try to do that. And meanwhile, Scalawag Sue said that she would go and try to find a boat that they could steal to use later that night, perhaps. And also she said that she wanted to go and talk to Fabriio. And here's where my faction table started to make things interesting again. Sergeant Maravance, who was looking for the group, was unable to make any moves, in part because of the misinformation that Nicodeme had spread throughout the underworld. She just wasn't finding any leads. The Brotherhood was holding back because of the failed assassination attempt, so they wouldn't be making any moves this day either. But there was a chart that I had off to the side that talked about people who might be in danger because of their association with the party. Lucius and Egil were on that list, but they were safe because they were with the party. However, Fabriio was still on the list. So I decided that there would be a 1 in 6 chance of the cultists coming after Fabriio. And I rolled a 1. And here's the beautiful thing. Dan had said that Sue was going to go scout the boats. Then he chimed in, oh, and one more thing, by the way, on my way back, I'm going to go and see Fabriio. I was like, oh my gosh, this is perfect. All right, so with all those things ready to unfold, let's talk about how they worked out in play. First, I went to Voron and Tor Delkin. They found somebody who gave them kind of a tour of the bay. They went by the lighthouse. They saw that there was a work site on the island. There was a ferry that was apparently taking workers to and fro. I told them that the lighthouse was almost done, except for the very last floor, which was partially built but open to the sky. I said that there was nothing immediately threatening about it. I said it just looked like there was a work crew on there. It was just like a, like a work site. That was it. They also found a few sea caves around the island, and then they headed back to shore. Then I turned to Scalawag Sue, who walked into Fabrio's favorite hangout to see him. And as she approached, she saw that there were people backing away from the establishment and running off. She walked in, kind of like Jack Sparrow, brazenly, and saw 2 burly guys in leather armor holding Fabriio by the arms, while a guy in dark robes stood in front of him saying, "And it'll go poorly for you if you don't." At that point, she just pulled out her saber and attacked. She rolled a natural 20, and so she dug the saber deep into the robe guy's side. The burly guys got surprised, and so then we rolled initiative. Fabriio managed to throw one of the guys off of him now that they were distracted. Remember, Fabrizio's a pretty beefy guy. I figured it would make sense for Zara to be in the neighborhood since she was out looking to be hired as a sellsword. So I just decided that she would hear the commotion, and so she decided to come in and join the fight. The fight was quick and brutal. The robe priest tried to cast a spell and failed, and Scalawag Sue took him out very quickly. Fabriio punched one guy and smashed a bottle into the other guy's face. They eventually took down the guy who had the bottle in his face. The other guy got away. Fabriio tried to take him down by throwing a chair after him, but missed. And then he was like, I was afraid he'd talk. And then Sue told Fabriio, "I came to warn you. They're after us and they might come after you by association." She said, "The whole town's rotten. This goes all to the way to the Sea Lord, and the people who end up suffering are regular people like us." At that point, Fabriio got a hard look in his eye and said, maybe. It seems like I have a little bit of organizing to do. Now, I don't know if the players picked up on it, but Fabriio has been developing over the campaign. He is the darling of the docks, but he's also more than just a pretty face and a fun, tough guy. When push comes to shove, he's willing to organize a resistance, and that's what I intimated that he might be doing with that comment. I didn't roll to see if Fabriio would do this. I just let it flow from the sense that I'd been getting about him from interaction to interaction. So, I kind of felt like this was an emergent character development that was really satisfying to me. And, it's kind of cool because the party seems to like Fabriio, like genuinely like Fabriio. So anyway, so that's where he was. So then Fabriio told them that he could arrange for a safe location for the party through some smugglers that he knew. And so we ended up wrapping that up by saying, okay, probably the party's going to go to Fabrio's friend's smuggler's hold and hide out there, since they knew that their new hideout had already been compromised. So at that point, everybody rendezvoused. The talks of fleeing Freeport came up again, but they agreed to at least investigate the lighthouse that night and see what they would find. They'd steal the boat that Sue had scouted, go to the island and poke around, and Lucius and Egil would hide out at Fabrio's friend's smuggler's den. Now here's the thing. If you read the adventure that I was running, there's really nothing of interest written for the worksite because the adventure assumes that you won't get there until the third written adventure. Consequently, I was kind of unprepared for this, but I made it up on the spot. It was really when they started asking questions that I decided that workers were carried back and forth every day on this ferry, that there were warehouses on the island with tools, and that there was a minor guard presence. Maybe I should have beefed up that guard presence a little bit more, but I decided that the players would at least get to explore an almost finished worksite. And so we started to do just that. So the characters went to the island at night. They pulled up near the rocks and they clambered up and they made their way towards the worksite. They saw that there was a guard who was identified as Haldor making lazy rounds around the facility. They also saw the keeper of the place come out and interact with Haldor. And nobody really comes to this island, so neither of them were really particularly alert. In fact, I made a perception roll for Haldor and he rolled a 1. I'm rolling a lot of 1s. I really don't make this stuff up, but it's just that I tell you when I rolled 1s. So I decided he got bored and he fell asleep on watch. So then the party was able to very easily sneak into the White House and explore it. Again, if you read the adventure, they say there's really nothing there. It's just a worksite. But I decided to just let them linger rather than hand wave it. I decided to let them linger. Since I had said that the lighthouse was almost completed, I decided that a lot of the statuary and stuff that the adventure says is there. The decor of the place and the layout of the place is largely intact. I made the decision that the doors wouldn't be in place, but in terms of the bigger statuary and stuff, I said that's going to be in place. So they explored the lighthouse. The first 2 floors seemed weird, more like a temple than a lighthouse with colonnades and statues of sea gods and a war god. And then there was this big spiral staircase that they took up to the 2nd floor, and there they found more of the same. But the place is 5 stories and they saw that there were no more staircases leading up, just a dead end. So they were like, wait a minute. And they started asking questions like, how do the workers get up there? How will this function as an operational lighthouse? This doesn't make sense. It's not a good layout. So they started figuring out there had to be secret doors, and they scoured around for them and they found them. And they found the hidden staircase that takes them to the 3rd level. And that's where I decided that things would get scary and weird. Voron, who was in the lead, opened the panel at the top of the stairs, the hidden stairs that they were going up, and a stench of rotting flesh hit him hard. Voron flinches a little bit, but then Jason was very specific. He said that Voron places the lantern on the stairs and comes up to his shoulders and scans the room. I told him, you see a mass of flesh undulating behind you. Eyes and mouths start opening on this thing, and you hear this weird gibbering sound as this mound of grotesque flesh rises up and moves towards you. Make a wisdom saving throw. This was a gibbering mouther. Now, the module doesn't expect this to be here until the 3rd adventure, but knowing why it's eventually placed there, I decided that it made sense for it to be here now. Using the Shadowdark rules, when you fail your wisdom save against a gibbering mouther, you perform a random action. You either run away, attack a nearby creature, or do nothing. As the party entered, chaos erupted. Players were either making or failing saves. Some ran to random corners of the room out of the range of the gibbering mouthers, so they were able to regain their composure. Some attacked each other. Some froze. It was very clear this was all due to this creature messing with their perceptions of reality and disorienting them. Fortunately for them, I rolled really poorly for the mouther the whole combat. The only person it was able to hit with an attack and latch onto with a tentacle was Voron. But the party took a good amount of damage from each other. Soralia, for example, got hit by Cora with her bastard sword. She then tried to hit Cora with her warhammer. Tor Delkin shot Cora in the back of the shoulder for 7 points. Zara and Nicodeme ran into different corners. Sue got affected and fled. It was just a mess. But in the midst of all that chaos, there was this one beautiful moment. Poor Delkin failed his wisdom saving throw against the Gibbering Mouther. He got the result, attack the nearest creature. When we looked at the map, the two options were either Cora, who was 20 feet away, or the Gibbering Mouther, who was 15 feet away. So, Tor Delkin ended up attacking the Gibbering Mouther anyway, and he rolled a natural 20. The way I described it was, Tor, you're confused, kind of in a maddened state. You pull back the bow as far as it goes and aim in a direction without realizing what you're aiming at, a crazy look on your eye. You let go, and the moment you release, you kind of gain this flash of awareness and you realize you're actually aiming at the correct target. The arrow pierces the creature, goes through its slime, hits whatever foul heart that thing had, and propels out the other side into the wall behind it. The Gibbering Mouther explodes into slime and it dissolves. So everybody cheered. It was such a good moment. It was just, again, the weird chaos of the dice in very weird chaotic battle, but it was a good moment. The characters snap out of their confusion. They're breathing heavily, they're dazed, and they decide to press on. They find another secret door that takes them to a ladder in one of, or that is a ladder in one of the columns that lead up. And when they went up into that chamber, the floor above had more ritual trappings. And instead of the sea gods and war gods that they saw earlier, they found symbols of Yig in every single brick that formed that layer or that level of the lighthouse. So Soralia identified what that was, and they were like, okay, this is what the dark design is, right? This serpent god. So then they continued to the top, and again, the final floor hadn't been built yet. So they came out to the top and they found themselves looking out into the night sky, seeing Freeport across the bay, and then they started to talk. They said, okay, we have evidence. We know something's wrong here, but nobody's gonna listen to us. Looking for more evidence, they went back downstairs, searched the first floor for subterranean passages, but they didn't find anything after a good long search. So they decided, since they were running out of night, they were going to leave, but they decided to make one last look, and they went into the place where the materials, the building materials, were kept. And there they found a giant crystal that they realized was probably going to be the light emplacement for the light source for the lighthouse. And Voron took a sword and cracked the crystal. Didn't destroy it, but put an imperfection in it. And with that, they're like, okay, maybe we should get off the island because we're running out of nighttime, and they didn't want to get caught there. So they went back to their new hideout that Fabriio had provided for them. And there, the inevitable discussion came up again. This whole town is against us, somebody said. Should we just leave? With that, Soralia asked Egil and Lucius, would you go with us if we left? So Lucius and Egil looked at each other, and then Lucius addressed the party. Look, you guys have done so much for us in this town. But as you've pointed out, Thuron, who is the high priest, might be compromised. So it doesn't make sense to present what we know to him if we can't trust him. We know the truth has been preserved. That's what they spent the whole day writing down, like every bit of information that they had gathered. They put it basically into a written testimony. And so now that they had new information about the lighthouse, they said, give us just a little time to write down everything that you've discovered and add it to this testimony. And we will leave it with somebody that we can trust. We can figure out who that is. But once we leave this truth in somebody's hand, we'll feel like we have fulfilled our vow to share information transparently. It doesn't make sense to stay here beyond that. So we will go with you. We will leave Freeport with you, with the idea that we'll leave for a while and come back in later, maybe slipping in to see what we can do upon our clandestine return. And with that, the party said, okay, deal, let's do it. Soralia was like, okay, I can leave now. And so we agreed that the next time that we would get together, it would be with me presenting them with several options or opportunities that they might be able to take to leave Freeport. So it looks like our Adventures in Freeport campaign is going to evolve into just a pirate campaign where, at least for the moment, the party will not be in Freeport. And you know what? I really like that. The last thing I want is for the players to do the adventure and be stuck in a situation they don't want. I want them to have that freedom to have their characters go wherever they want to go in the world. So that is the play report for session number 5 of Freeport Adventures. But I want to go back to the way I started this reflection, and that is going back to that feeling of being overwhelmed and unprepared, right? I started this session with my mind jumping from system to system. I wasn't sure I could pull this off, but the nice reminder was that the play is the thing. Prep is important, but I had already done prep, and that prep provided enough of foundation so that I should just feel comfortable getting together with my friends, starting to talk, starting to play, and let the activity of play carry everything going forward, right? Play is the thing, and it was a nice reminder for me to have. All right. Well, enough of that for now. Next week, I am probably going to produce another development log for Heroes Unbound, the superheroes role-playing game that I am working on. And I do have a few more play reports to share with you. So if you don't want to miss any of that, make sure that you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell icon. In the meantime, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for sticking around to the end if you did. And as always, I wish you good health. I wish you good cheer. I wish you good gaming. Goodbye.